When we were in late middle school, manhunt became a big thing in our neighborhood. I don't know if kids still play this today, but it's basically hide and seek where one group hides and one person seeks. And then when you're found, instead of being out, you join the manhunters. It's fun. And usually by the end of the night, there would be around 8 or so of us left whose parents were particularly generous or forgetful with bedtime. And by now, even in the summer, it had started to get dark, which was obviously the best time to play manhunt. I was the seeker this round, and it took me longer than usual to find my first sidekick. I was kind of known as the manhunt champion in the neighborhood, and that's definitely not a brag because, out of context, it makes me sound like Jeffrey Dahmer. Now anyway, I found the first kid, I forget his name now, but he was acting kind of skittish and weird. And I remember he was one of those kind of larger, muscular guys even in middle school, sort of like a gentle giant. Now certainly someone who didn't get spooked easily. Matthew, I think that was his name, and this Matthew was going on about how he had seen a kid really high up in a tree, and he was kind of worried. I asked which of us it was, and he said he didn't recognize the guy at all. Apparently he looked younger, like an elementary school kid, and I joked that maybe he'd seen a monkey, and Matthew was kind of like, yeah, that's pretty much how he was sitting. And I asked if it was definitely another kid, and he said yes, for sure, because the kid even said hello to him in a sort of quiet voice. Normally in manhunt, the hunters would split up once they'd found someone, but Matthew stuck to my side like a fly on honey, and he was so unusually jumpy. "Is that so-and-so?" he'd ask, pointing to nothing. "Is Carrie hiding over there?" toward an obviously empty bush. Now, I kept watching him, and he kept glancing up at the tree branches, too. This little kid had really spooked him, and I had no idea why a little kid, whether he was up at a tree or not, would bother big old Matthew. Now, eventually, we found a couple of more kids, and Matthew was incredibly eager to tell them about the little kid in the tree and ask if they'd seen him. They hadn't, of course, and they were naturally suspicious that me and Matthew were trying to mess with them. I assured them that I hadn't seen the kid either, and I only knew what Matthew had told me. The 2 new hunters went off scouring the forest for the remaining 4 hiders, but Matthew stuck with me. Again, he kept acting spooked and weird and jumping at little shadows here and there, and we could hear some of the other kids in the distant undergrowth, probably the 2 hiders running from the 2 seekers. Every time Matthew heard a branch crack underfoot or worse overhead, he'd sort of jump back. Eventually, I asked him why this little kid had freaked him out so much. Matthew was one of those guys who took a long time to answer, sometimes to the point that it felt like he just wasn't going to reply. Now, in the near darkness, I could see that he was working out how to explain it, though. He said that there was something wrong about the kid, like he almost looked old. And I asked him what he meant, and again he paused infuriatingly for a while, and I prompted him, "Like a Victorian child?" And Matthew said yes. But not just that. Like he was clearly a young kid, but somehow looked like an old man. I had no idea what he was trying to convey, and I was sure that he just imagined it, so we went back to seeking. Now suddenly I realized Matthew wasn't behind me. I looked, and he was some feet back, just standing there, staring. I followed his gaze, and of course he was looking up into a tree on a very high branch. "There he is," Matthew said. I was closer, and I squinted. Now, I thought I could see maybe a shape on the branch. It could have been a person, or something from a nearby tree, a clump of leaves or anything. And I asked Matthew if he could see this kid clearly, and he said, yeah, couldn't I? And I told him that no. All I could see was a sort of shadow that could have been anything. And so I started to walk toward the tree where this kid supposedly sat up in the branch, and it could have been one of the 2 remaining hiders after all. Matthew slowly but carefully darted up behind me, so silent that I hadn't even heard him. He grabbed my shoulder and told me not to come any closer. I didn't really know what to say, and I definitely couldn't clearly see this kid that Matthew was seeing, and I didn't really want to call him a lunatic. He was a gentle giant, but certain things kind of just set him off. Mental health talk was one of them, and I was alone in the woods with him, and I didn't want to start a fight with the guy on my own. Now instead, I pointed at the weird shadow that I guess could have been possibly slightly been a person, and asked Matthew if he could really clearly see this old-looking young kid up there on the branch. Matthew immediately reacted with horror. He was like, "No," and pointed to a different branch, one I hadn't looked at. I had to stifle a small scream and jump back in horror, as Matthew was right. This weird little kid was sitting on a branch a good 20 feet in the air, and I think it was a he, was staring at us with kind of sad eyes, and I saw exactly what Matthew meant about him looking old. He was clearly an elementary school kid, but his eyes looked ancient, like he'd seen some stuff. And the kid said hello shyly, and then he asked if he could play with us. And he was wearing what looked like pajamas, but old-style ones, sort of like a nightgown, and I'm pretty sure he had bare feet. I barely mumbled out a reply, saying that we just about finished our game now, but we played manhunt most days, so if he came and found us earlier on the ground and introduced himself, then he was welcome to join in. And the kid just looked at us for a while, clearly saddened, and then just said, "Oh, okay." And then the weird little dude scrambled along the branch behind the tree trunk, and that was the last we saw of him. Ever. Now, one final thing, as he disappeared behind that tree trunk, I could have sworn, absolutely sworn, that his sad young little face transformed into a brief grimace of the most hateful anger I'd ever had directed my way. I told Matthew that we should get out of there, and thankfully the other two seekers had found the other two hiders, so we all went home. None of us mentioned the little kid in the tree again, and we never heard anything about any hauntings in that forest, or dead kids, or kids going missing, and there was no town, urban legend that it could have related to. Maybe he really was just a weird little elementary schooler, lonely and looking to play with the big kids. But if that was the case, I just have two questions. Why did he freak Matthew out so bad? And why, when I looked at him, was I certain that I could see the leaves in the forest behind him just slightly through his body, as if he wasn't entirely corporeal? Back in 2007, I was a fire investigator for a large paid fire department. We had a 4-alarm fire at a group of 6 large buildings that were built in the early 1900s. Heavy timber and brick construction, with each being 7 to 9 stories tall. For years, the floors were cleaned with an oil-based chemical, so these buildings were essentially one big matchstick, and the fire came in at around 2 in the morning. The fire was stopped after it destroyed 3 of the 6 buildings, and later in the afternoon, we, the investigators, were having a meeting on site when a captain from one of the engines came up to us and said that when he was looking for a fire extension in the 4th building, he heard, as he described, several blood-curdling screams coming from what he thought was the basement area. He said the water was too deep, and with limited lighting he was unable to do a complete search of the area. And by the next day we knew the water would have drained out of the building, so I volunteered to go check it out, me, myself, and a big flashlight. I entered from street level, which was actually the 3rd floor with a sub-basement, and then the basement itself, so 5 floors to go down. Where the light from my flashlight was not focused on, it was a total blacked-out environment. I couldn't see my hand right in front of my own face. No sound other than my breathing and the creaking and popping of the old wooden stairwell that I was climbing down. Firefighting is a pitch-black job for the most part, so I wasn't freaking out about the lack of lighting. When I reached the sub-basement level, I heard a distinct male voice say, "Stop. Don't go any further." It came from further down the stairs. No, it wasn't demonic sounding. It was just a male's deep voice, maybe a little gruff. I hesitated, thinking my mind was actually playing tricks on me, and I shone my flashlight down the steps, but the floors were roughly 20 feet apart, so I couldn't really see the next landing, and there was a landing into each floor's fire door and another halfway between. I was between the sub-basement landing and the next halfway landing when this happened, so technically I should have been able to see at least the outline of the next landing, but my flashlight's glow was just eaten up by the darkness. I remember I took 2 more steps down, and then my heart skipped a beat, or probably beats, because in a more forceful and louder voice it said, "Stop." It wasn't some quick stop, it was sort of drawn out, a very matter-of-fact stop. And that did it for me. I turned around and started making my way back up to the level I came in on. Now, I'll be the first to say that I was finally scared and doing a little full-body shaking because I couldn't go fast because I had to visualize each and every step with my flashlight's glow. I finally made it back into the beautiful sunshine and told my chief that it was just too dark to adequately do a search. I wasn't about to tell him about the voice. He probably would have told me that I was nuts. Now, later that week, we had to have that building demolished, and once the debris was removed down to the basement level, we ran a cadaver dog over the area and it hit on nothing. And then, just to say that we covered all the bases, we then had a forensic team come in and go through that area and they found nothing. Now, I'm not sure how you would classify this type of occurrence, but I'll go to my grave knowing what I heard. Do any of you guys remember the board game Mousetrap? I think it's still around probably, and it feels like one of those games everyone had growing up, and I kind of want to believe it's still around now. Now, Google says it still is, and the mice look majorly different though, but the diver piece seems to be exactly the same. Now, this is relevant because the diver from Mousetrap is kind of the subject of my weird childhood experience. And so for the three people who don't know what it is, Mousetrap is a board game where you essentially work together to build a Rube Goldberg-type machine, and then in endgame you compete with each other to trap each other's mice. It's really fun, it's a tactile game, and building the crazy Mousetrap used to be a real hoot. Now, I won't explain the whole thing, but one of the aspects of the machine involves a diver being catapulted into a bucket. So in the old copy me and my siblings had, the diver was green, and the way the model is designed, it looks like he's about to dive, obviously, but that also means that his hands are in a praying position. My siblings and I loved board games. It was back in the 80s, so the choice for little kids seemed completely endless. We loved board games and those Tiger LCD handheld video games. Do you guys remember those? I had an absolutely freaking fantastic Top Gun one. Highway to the Danger Zone, baby. Except it was more like the bleep bloop bleep bleep type. But our imaginations filled in the gaps with all these games, and electronic or board, and the board games about haunted houses or creepy swamps really transported us to those locations. Mousetrap really turned us into mad scientists and mice, at the same time, I guess. And then as we got older, we played things like Hero Quest, Catan, Risk, but we still played Mousetrap, even when some of us were in our early/mid-teens, because it was just timeless. There were 4 of us siblings. I was the second eldest, but the eldest was our sister Lisa. She was the one who bought the new board game that changed it all, the Ouija board. Now, this isn't one of those stories, I promise. In fact, it's kind of significant that we never even used the Ouija board, but its presence definitely did cause a creepy incident. And so Lisa bought the Ouija board, and the rest of us were all hyped up to play it one night. Maybe the next time our parents went out overnight on a date night, and Lisa was entrusted with the care of the rest of us. Now, that wouldn't be for a few weeks, though, so the Ouija board box got put in the board game cupboard right on top of the Mousetrap box. And so the board game cupboard was downstairs in the family living room. Now, one night, our parents were out for an hour or so, and I was upstairs playing Nintendo with my younger brother Kevin when we heard a weird sort of whistling sound coming from downstairs. I don't know how to describe it, but we both sort of looked at each other with this unspoken understanding that this sound was something creepy. I don't actually remember the sound to describe it now, other than that it sounded unnatural somehow. We went downstairs, and our youngest sibling, Claire, was in the kitchen. She was a lot younger than the rest of us, just 6 years old at the time, and Kevin and I checked on her, and she asked if we heard the weird scream. She said it came from the living room, and her bottom lip was kind of trembling like it had really spooked her. We went into that room, and the only thing that seemed out of place was the board game cupboard. One of the doors was open slightly, and it was the kind of cupboard that closed magnetically, so this was definitely weird. Lisa joined us in that living room and asked what was up, and she said that she hadn't heard the sound because she was listening to her Walkman. Now, we opened the board game cupboard, and the mousetrap game was kind of sticking out. It's hard to explain, but it was obvious that whatever weirdness was going on involved that. We got the box out and opened it, and I wasn't immediately clear what had happened at first, but then Kevin noticed it. The diver figurine's praying hands had been cut clean off, seemingly by a scalpel because of how smooth and perfect the cut was. Now, of course, one of us had to have done it. It wasn't Kevin, because he had been with me. I don't know why it could have been Claire since she was so young, and the only slightly realistic suspect was Lisa, but to this day she swears it wasn't her. Now, I said something like, I guess the diver can't pray anymore, and we had a sort of running joke that he was praying for the mice and kind of thought no more of it. Now, fast forward many years later. Our parents have now both sadly passed away, and it came down to me, Claire, and Lisa to clear out our old family home and go through their things. Kevin lives abroad and unfortunately couldn't make it back. When we were going through the board game cupboard, me or Lisa, I forget who, but one of us brought up the weird incident with the diver's hands. We sort of speculated about why we hadn't investigated the incident further, and we argued about whether we maybe did. All the board games were exactly how we left them, and I realized that we hadn't actually played Mousetrap since the diver incident, so it just sort of sat there on top of the Ouija board box, which we'd also never actually used. I can't remember if this was a conscious decision or not. Either way, Lisa pulled out both boxes, and sure enough, the diver was still handless, no longer able to pray for the mice. I'm not sure why we expected anything else. What I didn't expect, though, was what we found when Lisa opened the box to the Ouija board. She was curious if it was still in good condition, having been the one to buy it back in the day and then never touch it. The usual components were there: the board, the planchette, a pencil and a notepad paper so players could write down the messages from the beyond. But also sitting in the box was a single piece of green plastic. 2 hands cast in the position of praying. Clearly the hands had been sliced from the mousetrap diver, just sitting there in the Ouija board box as far as I knew, and we had never opened or let alone played it. There's still the possibility that Lisa did this as a sort of prank, or that Claire did it for some bizarre childhood reason. Both of them swear on God's name that they don't remember setting up this prank, though, and we kind of moved on from it too quickly, in my opinion. If it had been a prank, one of us would have tried harder to freak the others out, and it was only now that we were freaked out, though. That strange sound that we heard that day, the diver's praying hands being severed, and the hands being clearly placed in the Ouija board's box. Our father, who'd passed away most recently and whose death had led us to clearing out the house, had died on that property, and we all agreed to dispose of the Ouija board and the mousetrap box, no matter whether it was a prank or supernatural, just in case some bad juju caused any harm to Dad's spirit in the afterlife. Maybe this doesn't seem scary to some, but to me, there is no explanation for why the diver's praying hands were cut off and why we didn't investigate further. My theory is that some dark presence lingered in the house and would have been unleashed if we'd played around with that Ouija board. Now, I think the whole series of events stopped us from doing so and maybe prevented my family from getting truly haunted. In many ways, that's reassuring, but it makes me wonder what kind of force could have been so dark and threatening that another supernatural force would step in and warn us in whatever weird way it was able. Claire had the idea to burn sage in the house, and we did so after ensuring that that mousetrap and the Ouija board had been carted away by the garbage men. We didn't tell Kevin about the incident. He was the skeptic among us, and he would have laughed at us. There are a whole bunch of other reasons relating to my family, too, that caused me to believe this, but it'd turn into a novel if I listed them all. But I am convinced that some benevolent force was looking out for us that day by trying to illustrate the fact that the Ouija board would block any kind of holy blessing or maybe even prayer inside our house. Make of it what you will. I'm just very glad that we never went ahead and played with that Ouija board anyway. Now, I never posted anything on here before, but I'm at a loss for words this morning. Now, let me start this out by saying my son does not watch graphic television shows, nothing violent, and he's a dinosaur-loving kid and mostly watching Land Before Time and the occasional Jurassic Park or Jurassic World movies with me and my fiance, who's a 31-year-old male. Now, we recently just bought our house, about 2 months ago now, and I started to notice little things, but nothing that was sounding any sort of warning bells. I've lived in haunted houses before, so I just went on with my day and essentially ignored it until one night at around 11:30, I heard whistling. Now, I live in the Appalachians, so whistling at night is a big no-no in my house, so I call out to my fiancé and tell him to stop whistling in the house, or will invite weird spirits in. He comes into our bedroom and I said to him, "Why the hell are you whistling at night?" And he goes pale and says, "I'm not whistling." And I'm thinking he's messing with me, so I just say, "Yeah, okay," and go to bed. Now, the next morning I'm in the shower and he comes in and says, "Be honest with me. Were you pranking me last night?" And I, of course, tell him everything that happened and assure him that I was not pranking him. He is a skeptic and always has been, and he again goes pale and just says, "Okay," and drops it. Nothing happened for about 2 weeks until 3 nights ago I was on a phone call with my cousin and heard a loud crash. My fiancé works night shift, so I immediately go into protector mode and assume someone was breaking in. That's how loud it was. I'm still on the phone with my cousin and she is witnessing everything that's happening. I call out asking if anyone is there. Now, I know, I'd be the first one killed in a horror movie, but if someone is in my house, I wanted them to know that I was coming and not afraid, even though I clearly was. I get to the bottom of the stairs and at first I see nothing, so I'm starting to feel less on edge until I walk out into my kitchen. I notice a candle, one of those 3-wick ones that you can buy at Walmart, halfway across the room. I look at the entry table where I had it sitting and a painting I also keep there was knocked over. So my first thought was, okay, the house was settling and it just knocked the candle over, no big deal. I picked everything up and set it back where I had it, though I thought it was strange that it mysteriously fell over, especially since I have a 4-year-old who runs all over the house all the time and the vibration from that hasn't knocked it off. And so I decided that I'd test to see what it would take to make it fall. I'm running, jumping, doing everything I can to try and get it to fall the way it did, and it's not budging. I even hit the table and it still didn't fall. And so, of course, I'm a little spooked, but decided to just go to bed. Last night, as I'm falling asleep, I heard loud banging coming from downstairs. Of course, my fiancé is working again, so I have to go down and check it out for myself. I go down and get a very unsettling feeling. All of the hairs on my body are standing up, and I feel like I'm being watched. I don't know what came over me, but I just said out loud, "I don't care that you're here, but please stop doing the things when I'm home alone, okay?" And then turned to walk up the stairs. Now, you know that feeling where you have to run up the stairs because it feels like something's chasing you? That's the feeling I get. I turn around and say it's enough, and that I will not be scared in my own home, and walk to my bedroom. I continue to hear things during the night, and my cat is very on edge. She's acting as if she was guarding my bedroom door. Now, about an hour later, at around 1 a.m., my son wakes up and asks if I will turn a movie on for him so he can fall back asleep, and so I do. Instead, I hear him mumbling in his room as if he's talking to somebody. Now, this is not abnormal for him, as he has a very big imagination and loves playing and coming up with his own worlds, creating stories for them as he goes. Now, about an hour ago, he's sitting with me and looks at me with a straight face and says, "Mommy, my ghost brother says I have to kill you, but I would never do that because I love you so much." Now I'm completely in shock and say to him, "What did you just say?" And he repeated it. And I then prodded, asking for more information. He's been going through this phase where he's been more defiant, but again, he's 4, so I don't think anything of it. But he tells me his ghost brother tells him to break toys, hurt animals, stomp on flowers he wants to pick for me, etc. Now, my son is very kind and very empathetic, And him saying all of this to me is very out of character for him. He's the child who won't kill a bug because what if they have a family and they miss them? That kind of little boy. So I'm in complete shock. I'm not sure if this is a made-up fantasy for him or if I should actually be concerned. And I come from a long line of people sensitive to the paranormal, so experiences are something I'm very familiar with, but not to this caliber. And I'm also worried for my son's safety and well-being, especially if it's something I cannot see to protect him from. If anyone has any advice, please tell me. Hey Joel, have you seen It, Welcome to Derry, the show yet? At the time of writing, I think there are 3 episodes out and it's really good, but it reminded me of a majorly creepy story that happened to me back in the early 2000s. I had been apartment hunting for what felt like forever. Now, finding an apartment wasn't the issue. The issue was Gizmo, my 3-year-old black cat, and I could not for the life of me find an apartment that would let me bring a pet cat. And there was absolutely no way on God's green earth that I was giving Gizmo up for adoption and moving anywhere without him, and so I spent an entire year living back in my childhood bedroom, all the while Mom acted a little too excited that her beloved daughter had come home to roost, quote-unquote. I adore my mom. Well, technically she's my stepmom and my dad, but after going away to college and then living in a pet-friendly apartment with Gizmo for nearly 3 years, I absolutely needed my own space. And so I didn't want Mom getting too used to the idea of me living back at home. Eventually, I found the perfect place. I waited for the catch that they wouldn't allow pets, but when I asked, the landlady invited me into her own apartment and introduced me to her 6 feline babies, and at that point, everything was perfect. I moved in as soon as possible and I didn't have too many belongings, and I think the most delicate item I owned was Gizmo's huge climbing tree that I bought for him, and I oversaw the moving guys handling that with more care than I did my own damn television or couch. Man, I spoiled that cat. But he deserved it, though. Rest in peace, Gizmo, you were the best of them, and he lived to the ripe old age of 18 and passed away peacefully, but our years together were absolutely wonderful. And then there was this one incident, though. In my bedroom in my apartment was an air vent grate for the air conditioner or something, and there was a very formal sticker on the grate saying that it was not to be covered up or have anything placed in front of it. So as a good little tenant who didn't want to be booted back home again, I left that ugly vent visible. Now, this was only a problem because Gizmo was obsessed with it. That cat would sit in front of that vent for hours and hours at a time. Occasionally he'd let out a little mew or gently swipe at it, but mostly he'd just stare. I was beginning to feel a little bit neglected by my pet, and he was more interested in the damn vent than he was in me. Still, as you know, that's cat.